The blood on her hands had dried hours ago, but Eleanor Hartwell could still feel its phantom warmth as she stumbled through the sage brush outside Laramie, Wyoming territory, in the dying light of September 1878. She had not killed anyone, but she had watched her stepfather try to kill her mother one time too many. And when Eleanor finally fought back hard enough to give her mother time to escape, she knew she could never return to that house of horrors, perched on the edge of town where respectable people pretended not to hear the screams. The moon rose fat and silver over the prairie as Eleanor walked, her split lip throbbing, her ribs aching where his boot had connected before she managed to smash the iron skillet across his temple. She had grabbed nothing but the clothes on her back and the small knife her real father had given her before consumption took him when she was 12. That had been 6 years ago, and in those 6 years, her mother had married a monster dressed in a banker's suit. Eleanor was 18 now, old enough to know that some kinds of love were poison, and young enough to believe she could outrun her past if she just kept moving. She had been walking for 3 hours when she saw the glow of a campfire in the distance, nestled in a small valley between 2 rolling hills. Common sense told her to avoid it. A lone woman on the prairie at night was prey to any number of dangers. But her canteen was empty, her throat was dust, and the temperature was dropping fast. Eleanor had to choose between the certain misery of a cold night without water and the possibility of finding help, or at least mercy. As she approached the camp, she could make out the silhouette of a single horse and a man sitting with his back against his saddle, a coffee pot resting on stones near the fire. He had not drawn his weapon, which meant he had heard her coming and decided she was not a threat. That gave her a small measure of hope. "That is far enough," he called out when she was about 20 feet away. His voice was deep but not unkind. "State your business." Eleanor's voice cracked when she spoke. "I need water, I can pay." It was a lie, she had nothing. There was a long pause. Then the man stood, and Eleanor could see him properly in the firelight. He was tall, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had seen its share of hard weather. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim, a dusty shirt, a leather vest, boots that had walked 1,000 miles. His hat hung on his saddle horn. "Come on then," he said, gesturing to the fire. "Coffee is hot too." Eleanor approached slowly, every muscle tense and ready to run. But when she got close enough to see his eyes, she found only concern there and perhaps curiosity. He handed her his own tin cup filled with water from a larger canteen, and she drank it so fast she choked. "Easy," he said, and his hand hovered near her shoulder but did not touch. "There is plenty more." When she had drunk her fill and accepted the coffee he poured, he settled back against his saddle and studied her face in the firelight. She knew what he saw, the split lip, the bruise blooming on her cheekbone, the way she held her left arm close to her ribs. "Got a name?" he asked. "Eleanor." "I am called James Morrison. Jim, mostly. You running from something or toward something?" The question was so direct it startled a laugh out of her, though it hurt her ribs. "I ran away from the only home I knew," she said, and the words felt like stones dropping into a well. Jim Morrison took a sip of his coffee and nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. When he spoke again, his words were simple and solid as bedrock. "Then this one is yours now." Eleanor stared at him. "What? This camp, I mean. Tonight anyway, you are safe here. I will not touch you, and I will not let anything else touch you either. Tomorrow we can figure out where you are headed, but tonight you rest." She did not cry often. Her stepfather had beaten the tears out of her years ago. But something in Jim Morrison's plain decency cracked the armor around her heart, and she found her eyes stinging. She looked away quickly, blinking hard. "I do not have anywhere to go," she admitted. "I just knew I had to leave." Jim was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "I am headed to my ranch about 30 miles northwest of here. It is not much, just a small spread I have been building up for the past 3 years. My sister, Ruth, lives there with me. She is a couple years older than you, I would guess. She could use the company, and we could use help around the place if you are willing to work. Room and board plus wages." Eleanor looked at him sharply, searching for the trap. Men did not offer help like this without wanting something in return. But Jim Morrison's face was open and honest, his posture relaxed. He looked like a man who had made a simple business proposition, nothing more. "Why would you do that?" She asked. "You do not know me. I know you are in trouble, I know you are alone, and I know what it is like to need help and not have anywhere to turn." He met her eyes steadily. "My sister and we left a bad situation back in Kansas 4 years ago. Our father was a drunk who gambled away everything we had. Ruth was 19 and I was 22. We came out here with nothing and built something from scratch. I figure if someone had offered us a hand back then, we would have taken it. So I am offering you one now." The simple truth in his words settled something in Eleanor's chest. She nodded slowly. "I can work. I am good with horses and I can cook and clean and mend. I am not afraid of hard labor." "Good," Jim said. "Then we have an agreement. Get some sleep. We will head out at first light." He pulled a blanket from his pack and handed it to her, then moved his saddle to the other side of the fire to give her space. Eleanor wrapped herself in the blanket and lay down, her body aching and exhausted. She watched Jim Morrison through the flames as he settled in for the night, his rifle within easy reach, his body positioned between her and the open prairie. He was keeping watch, she realized, protecting her. For the first time in 6 years, Eleanor Hartwell felt something that might have been safety. She closed her eyes and slept. The ride to the Morrison ranch took 2 days. Eleanor rode behind Jim on his sturdy bay gelding, her arms around his waist, her body gradually relaxing against his back as the miles passed. He talked as they rode, telling her about the land, pointing out landmarks, explaining his plans for the ranch. He wanted to build up his herd, he said, and eventually have enough cattle to drive to market. He had started with just 50 head, and now he had nearly 200. It was slow going, but it was his, and that meant everything. Eleanor found herself listening not just to his words, but to the way he spoke them, with pride and determination, and a kind of gentle ambition that was nothing like the grasping greed she had known in her stepfather. Jim Morrison wanted to build something, not take something. The difference was profound. They stopped at a creek the first night to water the horse and refill their canteens. Jim shot a rabbit, and Eleanor cleaned and cooked it over the fire, seasoning it with wild herbs she found growing nearby. He ate with genuine appreciation, complimenting her cooking, and she felt a small flicker of pleasure at the praise. "Tell me about your sister," Eleanor said as they sat by the fire after supper. Jim's face softened. "Ruth is the strongest person I know. When our father lost everything, she did not cry or complain. She just rolled up her sleeves and helped me plan our escape. She kept the books, managed the household, learned to shoot, and never once doubted we would make it. She is smart and tough and has a good heart. You will like her." "Will she like me?" Eleanor asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in her mind. "Will she be angry that you brought home a stranger?" Jim shook his head. "Ruth will understand. She knows what it is like to be desperate, and besides, she has been after me to hire some help for months." "She will be grateful." Eleanor hoped he was right. She had never had a friend her own age, never had another woman to talk to. Her mother had been too broken, too lost in her own misery, to be a companion. The thought of having a sister, even one who was not related by blood, filled Eleanor with a cautious hope. They reached the Morrison ranch late in the afternoon of the second day. It was a modest but well-maintained property nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. The house was small, built of logs and river stone, with a covered porch and real glass windows. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a corral for the horses, and fenced pastures where cattle grazed. It looked like a place where people worked hard and took pride in what they built. A woman came out of the house as they rode up, shading her eyes against the sun. She was tall and lean, with dark hair braided down her back and a calico dress covered by a practical apron. When she saw Eleanor, her eyebrows rose, but she did not look angry, only curious. Jim dismounted and helped Eleanor down, then walked forward to greet his sister. "Ruth, this is Eleanor Hartwell. She is going to be staying with us and helping around the ranch. Eleanor, this is my sister, Ruth." Ruth Morrison looked Eleanor over with sharp, intelligent eyes that took in the fading bruises and the careful way she moved. Then her expression softened, and she stepped forward with her hand extended. "Welcome, Eleanor. You look like you have had a rough time of it. Come inside and let me get you cleaned up. Jim, you see to the horse and then bring in Miss Hartwell's things." "She does not have any things," Jim said quietly. Ruth did not miss a beat. "Then I will lend her some of mine until we can get her sorted. Come on, dear." Eleanor followed Ruth into the house, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of these strangers who asked for nothing but her labor in return for shelter and safety. The interior of the house was clean and cozy, with handmade furniture, colorful rugs on the wooden floor, and curtains at the windows. It smelled like bread and coffee and wood smoke. It smelled like home. Ruth showed her to a small room off the kitchen that had a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. "This was supposed to be a pantry, but we can store food in the root cellar just as well. It is not much, but it is private and warm." "It is perfect," Eleanor said, and meant it. Over the following weeks, Eleanor threw herself into work with a desperate energy. She mucked stalls, fed chickens, gathered eggs, helped Ruth with the cooking and washing and mending. She worked until her muscles screamed and her hands blistered, and then she worked some more. It was as if she could scrub away her past with hard labor, could earn her place in this new life through sheer force of will. Jim and Ruth never pushed her to talk about where she had come from or what she had run from. They treated her with a gentle respect that was entirely new to her. Jim taught her to rope and brand cattle, to read the weather, to ride astride instead of side saddle so she could work more effectively. Ruth taught her to bake bread, to preserve vegetables, to shoot a rifle accurately. They treated her like family, and slowly, Eleanor began to believe that she might actually belong here. But it was Jim who occupied her thoughts more and more as autumn deepened, and the aspens turned gold in the high country. She found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the easy competence with which he handled the horses, the quiet authority he had with the cattle, the gentleness he showed to injured animals. He was patient and kind, never raising his voice in anger, never using his strength to intimidate. He was everything her stepfather was not. Eleanor tried to ignore the growing warmth in her chest when he smiled at her across the dinner table, tried not to notice how her heart beat faster when their hands accidentally touched while working side by side. She told herself she was being foolish, that he had offered her charity, not courtship. But her heart did not listen to logic. One evening in late October, Eleanor was in the barn putting away tack when Jim came in to check on a mare that was due to foal soon. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Jim spoke quietly. "You seem happier lately, more settled." Eleanor looked up, surprised. "I am. This place, you and Ruth, it is more than I ever hoped for. I cannot thank you enough." Jim hung the bridle he had been holding and turned to face her. "You do not need to thank me, Eleanor. You have earned your place here 3 times over. You are a hard worker, and Ruth thinks the world of you. You are not a charity case. You are part of this ranch now." The sincerity in his voice made Eleanor's throat tight. "I ran away from the only home I knew," she said softly, echoing the words she had spoken that first night. Jim stepped closer, his eyes warm in the lamplight. "Then this one is yours now," he replied. And this time the words felt like a promise, like a vow. They stood there in the quiet barn, the smell of hay and horse and leather surrounding them, and Eleanor felt the shift between them like a physical thing. Jim reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered on her cheek, feather-light, and Eleanor found herself leaning into his touch. "Eleanor," he said, and her name sounded like a prayer. "I do not want to presume. I do not want to make you uncomfortable. But I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with pity or obligation. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." Eleanor's breath caught. No one had ever said such words to her, had ever looked at her the way Jim was looking at her now, as if she were precious and valued and cherished. "I thought I was imagining it," she whispered. "I thought it was just me." "It is not just you," Jim said, and he smiled that slow, warm smile that made her heart stutter. "It has been both of us for a while now, I think." Eleanor closed the small distance between them and did something she had never done before. She reached up and kissed him. It was tentative and unpracticed, but Jim responded with a gentleness that made her feel safe and wanted all at once. His arms came around her carefully, as if she were something breakable, and she melted into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Jim rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly. I want to marry you if you will have me, but only when you are ready, Eleanor. There is no rush." "I want that too," Eleanor said, and the truth of it filled her with a joy she had never known. "I want a life with you, Jim Morrison. I want to build something real and good and lasting." They stood together in the barn as darkness fell outside, holding each other and planning a future that felt as solid and certain as the ground beneath their feet. Ruth was delighted when they told her the next morning. "I have been wondering when you two would figure it out," she said with a knowing smile. "You have been dancing around each other for weeks. I am so happy for you both." The courtship was sweet and chaste and filled with small, tender moments. Jim brought Eleanor wildflowers from the meadow. They took long rides together in the golden autumn afternoons, talking about everything and nothing. He held her hand across the dinner table, and she leaned against his shoulder in the evenings while Ruth read aloud from a book of poetry. They stole kisses in the barn and by the creek, learning each other slowly, building trust and affection and a love that felt unshakable. In December, when the first snow blanketed the valley, Jim asked Eleanor to marry him officially, with Ruth as their witness. He gave her a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, and Eleanor cried tears of joy as he slipped it onto her finger. They were married on a clear, cold day in January 1879 by a traveling preacher who came through the territory. Ruth stood up with Eleanor, and a neighboring rancher stood up with Jim. It was a small ceremony, but it was perfect. Eleanor wore a dress that Ruth had altered for her, a simple blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. Jim wore his best shirt and a clean pair of trousers, and he looked at Eleanor as if she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jim kissed her with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of love and respect. Eleanor felt the last of her old fears melt away. She was no longer Eleanor Hartwell, running from a nightmare. She was Eleanor Morrison, running toward a dream. Their wedding night was spent in the house they now shared, with Ruth tactfully retiring to the loft she had insisted on moving to weeks earlier. Jim was patient and gentle, and Eleanor discovered that love did not have to hurt, that intimacy could be a source of joy and connection rather than pain and fear. They lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, and Eleanor felt whole for the first time in her life. The winter was hard, as winters in Wyoming territory always were, but Eleanor faced it with a strength she had not known she possessed. She and Ruth worked together to keep the household running while Jim and a hired hand tended the cattle and broke ice on the water troughs. They told stories by the fire in the evenings, played cards, sang songs. They were a family in the truest sense of the word. In February, Eleanor realized she had not bled in 2 months. She told Ruth first, half terrified and half elated, and Ruth hugged her tightly and then helped her tell Jim. He was overjoyed, lifting Eleanor off her feet and spinning her around, then immediately setting her down and apologizing for being too rough. She laughed and kissed him and told him he would be a wonderful father. The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor was sick for the first few months, and Jim hovered over her constantly, making sure she ate and rested and did not overwork. Ruth was a rock, handling the household chores and reassuring Eleanor that everything would be all right. As her belly grew round, Eleanor felt a new kind of fear creeping in, but Jim held her every night and whispered that they would face whatever came together. Their son was born on a hot September day in 1879, exactly 1 year after Eleanor had stumbled into Jim's camp on the prairie. The labor was long and difficult, but Ruth and a midwife from a neighboring ranch saw her through it. When Eleanor finally held her baby boy in her arms, his tiny face red and wrinkled and perfect, she wept with a fierce, overwhelming love. Jim came in as soon as Ruth called for him, and he knelt by the bed with tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," he whispered, touching one tiny fist with a finger that looked impossibly large. "You are both beautiful." They named him Thomas after Jim's father, the man he had been before the drink took him. It was an act of hope, Jim said, a belief in second chances and new beginnings. Tom was a healthy, happy baby, and he transformed their lives in ways both exhausting and exhilarating. Eleanor discovered reserves of love and patience she had not known existed. Jim was a devoted father, taking his turn walking with the baby at night, changing diapers without complaint, singing nonsense songs that made Tom gurgle with delight. Ruth was a doting aunt, spoiling her nephew at every opportunity. As Tom grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Jim expanded the herd, built a new barn, and hired 2 more hands to help with the work. Eleanor learned to manage the books, discovering she had a head for numbers. Ruth started raising sheep for wool and meat, adding another source of income. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Tom was 3 years old, Eleanor found herself pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, more confident in her body's ability to do what it was designed to do. Their daughter, Mary, was born in the spring of 1883, a tiny, delicate baby with Jim's dark hair and Eleanor's blue eyes. Tom was fascinated by his baby sister, and he would sit by her cradle for hours, singing to her and making sure her blanket was tucked in properly. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to grow, and so did their family. 2 years after Mary, Eleanor gave birth to another son, whom they named Daniel. Then came Catherine, and finally, when Eleanor was 30 years old and thought they were done, a surprise baby boy they called William. The house had to be expanded to accommodate their growing brood. Jim built on 3 additional rooms, a proper parlor, and a larger kitchen. Ruth, who had married a neighboring rancher in 1882, lived just 5 miles away and was a frequent visitor, bringing her own children to play with their cousins. The valley rang with the sounds of children's laughter, a stark contrast to the silence of Eleanor's childhood. There were hard times, of course. A drought one summer nearly broke them, and they had to sell half the herd to survive. Mary contracted scarlet fever when she was 5, and for a week, Eleanor and Jim took turns sitting by her bedside, praying and hoping. But Mary recovered, and the rains came eventually, and the herd was rebuilt. They weathered every storm together, their love and commitment deepening with each challenge they faced. On their 10th anniversary, Jim took Eleanor back to the spot where they had first met, a patch of prairie that was now part of their expanded property. They left the children with Ruth for the night and camped under the stars, just the 2 of them. "You remember what I said to you that first night?" Jim asked as they lay side by side, looking up at the vast expanse of sky. "You said this home was mine now," Eleanor replied, turning to look at him. "I did not know it then, but I think I was already falling in love with you," Jim said softly. "You walked out of the darkness, broken and brave, and something in me recognized something in you. I saw myself in you, I suppose, someone who was lost and trying to find their way. You saved my life that night," Eleanor said. "Not just by giving me water and a place to sleep. You gave me hope. You showed me that there were good people in the world that love did not have to hurt." Jim pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You saved me too," he murmured into her hair. I did not realize how lonely I was until you came along. You made this place a home in a way it never was before." They made love under the stars that night, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice and deep affection. Afterward, they lay tangled together, warm and content, talking about their children, their dreams, their plans for the future. It was perfect. As the years passed, their children grew and thrived. Tom, serious and responsible, learned ranching from his father and had a natural gift for handling cattle. Mary was wild and free-spirited, happiest when she was riding her horse across the open range. Daniel was the scholar, always reading, always asking questions. Catherine was the nurturer, helping her mother in the kitchen and tending to injured animals. William was still young, but he showed signs of inheriting his father's gentle strength. Eleanor and Jim grew older together, their faces weathering and their bodies slowing, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex with time. They knew each other's stories, each other's scars, each other's dreams. They had built a life together from nothing, and they took pride in what they had created. When Tom turned 18 and announced his intention to marry the daughter of a neighboring rancher, Eleanor felt a pang of bittersweet emotion. Her firstborn, starting his own journey. Jim gave Tom 100 acres of their land to start his own spread, and they helped him build a house for his bride. It was the beginning of a new generation, a continuation of the legacy they had built. One evening, when Eleanor was 45 years old and Jim was 52, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the valley. Their children were scattered. Tom and his wife working their own ranch, Mary inside helping Catherine with supper, Daniel at the university in Cheyenne, William out checking the fences with the hired hands. "I ran away from the only home I knew," Eleanor said softly, repeating the words that had changed her life so many years ago. Jim reached over and took her hand, his fingers threading through hers with practiced ease. "Then this one is yours now," he replied, just as he had that first night. "It has been mine for a long time," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand, "but I am still grateful every single day that you gave it to me." "We gave it to each other," Jim corrected gently. "This life, this love, this family, we built it together." Eleanor looked out at the land they had tamed and nurtured, at the house full of love and laughter, at the man beside her who had shown her that home was not a place, but a person, a choice, a commitment renewed every day. She thought of the frightened, broken girl she had been, stumbling through the darkness with nothing but desperation and a flickering hope. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who was strong and loved and complete. Eleanor Morrison, rancher's wife, mother of 5, survivor of horrors and builder of dreams. She had run from the only home she knew, and she had found one that was infinitely better. She had found her place in the world, and more importantly, she had found her person. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor leaned her head on Jim's shoulder and let the peace of the moment wash over her. There would be hard times ahead, she knew. There always were. But she would face them with Jim by her side, with their children surrounding them, with the solid certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Inside the house, Mary laughed at something Catherine said, the sound bright and clear. In the distance, William's whistle echoed across the valley as he rode home. The cattle lowed softly in the gathering darkness. It was the music of home, the symphony of a life well lived. Jim kissed the top of Eleanor's head, and she smiled. 27 years ago, she had been a scared girl running from a nightmare. Now she was a woman at peace, surrounded by love, anchored by the man who had offered her a place by his fire and ended up offering her his heart. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Jim replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the stars came out one by one, diamonds scattered across black velvet, the same stars that had watched over them that first night. The wheel of the heavens turned, Seasons changed, children grew, but this remained constant. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a light that would never go out. The story of Eleanor and Jim Morrison became legend in that part of Wyoming territory. People spoke of the woman who ran away and the cowboy who gave her a home. But those who knew them best understood that the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. They were two broken people who had healed each other, two lost souls who had found their way home. They were proof that love, when it is real and true and built on respect and trust, can transform everything. Their grandchildren would sit on that same porch years later, listening to Eleanor tell stories of the old days, of how she met their grandfather, of the ranch when it was just a small spread with big dreams. She would tell them about running through the darkness, about a campfire and a cup of water and a voice that spoke words that changed her life. She would tell them that home was not always the place you were born, but sometimes the place you chose, the place that chose you back. And Jim would sit beside her, holding her hand, his eyes still warm with the love that had never faded, and he would add details she forgot, and they would laugh together over shared memories. They would look out at the land they had built, at the legacy they were leaving, and they would know that they had done something rare and precious. They had created a love that would outlast them, a story that would be told and retold, a home that would shelter generations. As the years turned and their children had children of their own, as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Eleanor and Jim Morrison grew old together in the house they had built. They never regretted the paths that had led them to that campfire in 1878, never wished for different lives. They had found what everyone searches for and few ever discover: a love that was equal parts passion and partnership, romance and friendship, heat and comfort. When Jim died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Eleanor grieved deeply but without regret. They had been married for 48 years, and they had loved each other well. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that she had built something that would last. On her deathbed, her family gathered around her, and her last words were about Jim, about how he had given her a home when she had none, how he had loved her when she thought herself unlovable. They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky as big and blue as the one that had watched over them all those years. The inscription on their shared headstone was simple. They found each other in the darkness and built a light that never went out. The ranch remained in the family for generations, passing from child to grandchild to great-grandchild. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original log cabin where Eleanor and Jim had raised their children remained at its heart, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. The story of how they met, of the woman who ran and the cowboy who offered her a home, was told and retold until it became part of the family mythology, a touchstone and an inspiration. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the valley and the stars came out one by one, some said you could still feel their presence there, still sense the love that had transformed that piece of Wyoming prairie into a true home. It was a love that had conquered fear and built hope, a love that had proven itself again and again through decades of shared life. It was the kind of love that changes the world, one heart at a time, one home at a time, one story at a time. Eleanor had run away from the only home she knew, and in doing so, she had found the only home she needed. And Jim had offered that home freely, generously, and in return had received a love that made him whole. Together, they had written a story that was uniquely theirs but universally true. The story of how two broken people became whole, how two strangers became family, how a campfire meeting on a September night in 1878 became the foundation of a legacy that would last forever. Their love was not perfect. They had argued and disagreed, struggled and failed, made mistakes and apologized and tried again. But it was real, and it was lasting, and it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection that never wavered. They had chosen each other every single day, through good times and bad, through prosperity and hardship, through youth and age. And in the end, that choosing, that daily commitment to love and cherish each other, was what made their story worth telling. The Wild West was a hard place, unforgiving and often cruel. But it was also a place where people could reinvent themselves, where the past could be left behind and a new future built from nothing but determination and hope. Eleanor and Jim embodied that possibility. They were the best of what the West could offer: courage, resilience, loyalty, and love. Their story was the story of America itself, of people coming together across divides, building something from nothing, creating family where there was none. And so the story ends where it began, with a woman running from darkness and a man offering light, with words spoken by a campfire that became a promise kept for a lifetime. "I ran away from the only home I knew," she said. "Then this one is yours now," he replied. And it was, forever and always, a home built on love that would never die.